Okay, now that we have gotten our information collected throughout our group project or throughout our case study, we can now look at how we can pool that information together to create a final decision tree and conduct our final analysis. Up until now, we've made a number of different decisions that have allowed us to collect the most accurate and simplified data to put into our final decision analysis. So what this process has shown is that oftentimes there's more than one decision that goes into making a bigger decision, and there's more than one decision process used. So if we're going to use PalmQM for Windows, and there are a number of different decision tree tools, as we know, the primary calculation in the decision tree is expected value. So you can do this by hand, or you can do this using Visio or Excel or another drawing software. Under PalmQM, we're going to use Module Decision Analysis, File New. Have to click the Decision Analysis module first. And we're going to use the Graphical Decision Tree. And this is our final project analysis. We want to maximize our profits. And we make sure again that it says maximize profits. One of the tools that we used to rule out whether or not we wanted to implement the process improvement project if we kept all three lines was to use our break even and our return on investment analysis options. And what that taught us back in week 3 was that we definitely wanted to implement that process improvement project. So we're going to add our 2 branches. This first one is going to be keep 3 lines. And we know that in order to implement our process improvement project, it was $50,000 per line, or a total of $150,000. And with this, there are 3 possibilities that could occur. So we're going to add our 3 branches, make sure that these are event nodes. And we're going to go back to some of our instructions to determine what exactly those 3 processes were. So let's shrink this a little bit and move it over here. And let's go back to some of our instructions. We have our finance manager. We also have our introduction project here. And it says to maintain the current product line, the project would cost $50,000 per line. So we have that. The higher quality and faster production would result in a 50% chance of increasing net sales. So we're going to have our increase. There is a 0.5 probability, but we don't know our net profit yet. So we're going to leave this here at 0, and we're going to go back to that. We also have a 20% net sales would decrease by 10%. And we don't know what that net profit would look like if it decreased by 10%. And we'll explain why we don't know that yet. And we have a 20% chance, and a 30% chance net sales would not change at all from the existing average. So we're going to put in our no change. And again, we don't quite know that yet. So we're going to go ahead and save this. And I'm going to just put it somewhere very quickly so that I can go back to it. But we don't want to lose this work here. So what is involved in net profit? That's where we go to our final worksheet so that we can start to calculate what net profit is going to look like. Net profit involves all of our revenues, revenue minus variable expenses minus fixed expenses. So what kind of costs and expenses do we have in our project now that we've taken a better look at all of the different things involved? We know that our sales department has both fixed and variable. So our commission is our variable. And our salaries are fixed. So let's add these little comments here so that we don't forget which portions that we need to calculate. So what about our production? They're a little bit different, right? Our cost per chair is variable, right? Because our total cost per chair stays the same, but how much our total cost comes from how many chairs we make times the total cost per chair. Our employees needed are worked into our cost per chair. So let's take a look at our production information here. So this is the production analysis that we did to determine how much our total cost per chair would entail. And what did that involve? It involved labor, our labor costs, which again are variable depending on how many chairs we make. Our machine costs, again, our total machine costs go up depending on how many chairs we make. Raw materials, the total raw material cost will go up depending on how much or how many chairs we make. So this cost per chair becomes the multiplier for our variable cost of production. The only fixed cost we really have is our building. Because that fixed cost, as we learned from our operations manager instructions, is $10,000 per building. So we're going to go ahead and plug that in here. Per building, per line. So each chair has to be manufactured in its own building. So we have 3 times in our status quo. We have 3 buildings that we're operating. If we were only running 2 lines, we would have 2 buildings that we were operating. So now we have our production, variable cost, and fixed cost. So let's go down to our administrative. Our administrative costs are all of the costs that do not involve sales or production, and they may be variable or fixed. Our admin costs, management, executive management, and our administrative overhead. This we know is fixed, but because the number of managers and administrative staff that we need varies depending on how many sales staff and production staff we have, these two can be considered variable costs. But they are at a fixed rate depending on how many we have. So that's where it can get a little bit tricky. They're essentially a mixed cost, but we need to calculate them into our final net revenue. So let's go back to this and find out why can we not just take our net revenue for our no change and decrease it by 10% or increase it by 20% depending on as a bottom line number. Well, because there are certain costs, our fixed costs, that are associated whether or not our sales increases or decreases. So it's not a flat 10% off of the net revenue. It's a 10% decrease in gross sales. So it will change from that 10%. So let's go back to our worksheet and figure out where some of these numbers come from.